Okay, September 12th, 1984. This is Joe Todd and Bernice Jackson, an interview with Mr. Carl Peoples. Sir, where were you born?
I was born right 2.5 miles north of Tangier, where my dad and father, I lived in the same house that I was born in.
Yeah. When's your birthday?
March 24th, 1914, when I was born.
And who's your father?
So the CC people is what he went by. His name was Christopher Plums.
And your mother's name?
And Mary Berger. And her folks filed on claim right west of town here, where the western plant is now.
Yeah. Okay. Where'd you folks come from?
Missouri, Shelby County, Missouri.
And your father was a farmer?
Yes.
How come they came to Oklahoma?
Well, my dad came out here with Bill Gwynn. The first time he came out, they came out in had a railroad car. And he came out with them in 1900, and then he went back to Missouri, and then he came back, and his folks came out there and brought his dad and mother and brothers and sisters. And they all came out in railroad cars to Tangier.
That was in 1901?
Yes.
And they homesteaded on the place that you live now?
Yes, his folks homesteaded south of Tangier, and he homesteaded 2.5 miles north of Tangier.
How far from Woodward is Tangier?
It's about 10 miles west.
Who'd they name Tangier after? Where'd they get the name Tangier?
Well, my mother used to tell me they had a meeting down there one night. They was going to select the name of the town, and they selected the name of Opal. And there was an old gentleman named Armstrong, Dr. Armstrong. He was a postmaster, and he sent that name in, or supposed to, and whenever it came back, it was named Tangier. That's the way the name Tangier originated. But it was known as Opal Precinct, voting precinct, for years until just recently when they did away with the precincts.
Mm-hmm. Had anyone filed on that homestead before?
No, I have the original grant now.
What do they do to prove up on it?
They had to live there 5 years and build a cabin on it, or plant so many fruit trees and so many shade trees and break out so many acres of land, and had to stay there a certain percent of the time that they filed on it.
What kind of house did he build?
Well, he used to have a one-room shack. Actually, he built it right on the line. His sister filed on 80 right south of his, and they built the shack right on the line, and she come down and stayed the required time on her side of the room, and he stayed on the other side, and then he later bought her claim out. And the kitchen that's in my house now is his original homestead cabin. Of course, it's been built on up and around now. But it was about 14 foot square, I guess, originally.
What's it made of? Just
wood, yes, studding, and they moved it up a ways from where it was originally.
Whenever you were a little boy, what kind of chores did you do in the farm?
Well, back then it was all horse work on equipment. You had to tend to the horses, and always had to milk cows and feed the chickens and gather the eggs, and always had to get in killing for the next morning's fire. And there was something to do all the time. As soon as you got big, I can remember when I got just a little old kid, I always wanted to help milk. As soon as Dad found out I could milk, why then from then on I had to milk, whether I wanted to or not.
Did you plow with horses or mules?
Both. We had both horses and mules.
Which did you prefer?
Oh, I prefer horses. Mules are a little bit, you had to watch them pretty close. They love to kick you clear out of the field if they got a chance.
How many acres could you plow in one day?
No, I don't know. We used to get, I think it was about 8 rounds and a half a day, half a mile long. We had just a list over land, wheat land. And we started listening, seemed like I could get about 8 rounds in a half a day. And then I could take about 5 rows to make an acre, half mile long.
How many acres of wheat did you have?
Oh, usually 50 or 60
Yeah.
to 100, it depended on the year.
You use a wheat drill?
Yes.
How does a wheat drill operate?
Well, it's just as the mechanism turns the gears, it turns the feeders down. There's a flute feed, and the wheat, so it's turned real slow. The grains come out and fall down the tube into the what they call a boot on the drill, and it runs right by the disc, which opens the fur that the grain falls in. And you have drags or press wheels behind it to pack the dirt around the grain.
Okay. How many horses did it take to pull a wheat drill?
Only about four good horses to pull a wheat drill good.
What about wheat harvest?
Yeah, that was a lot of work too. Of course, it was all we used a header barge or a header. And we had, usually it's most just a family affair, we used one barge, and I had one brother, and he was older than I was, and we took 6 head of horses on the header and 2 on the header barge. And we cut a load of wheat, then go to stack and unload it, and then go cut another load and unload it. And you had to get up early in the morning and get the horses in before sun up and feed them and get them ready and harness them up. You did a half a day's work before you ever got to the field.
How many hands were in a harvest team?
How many hands what?
Yeah, how many people were in a harvest team?
Well, if you run 2 barges, sometimes you'd get together with a neighbor and run 2 barges. And it takes 2 men in a barge, one to drive the team and one to stack the wheat down in the barge as you come up the elevator, then a man on the header to drive the header.
When did you first start using the combine?
It was about 1938 before we bought our first combine and tractor.
And how many pieces of equipment did that combine replace?
Well, they replaced the header and the header barge and a lot of work. You run into a lot of work when you know the pitchforks.
Mm-hmm. Did it replace the thresher too?
Yes, it replaced. Of course, when you stacked it, when you used the header barge, you had to stack the wheat, and then in about a month or so, when that thrashing machine would come around and thrash the wheat out, then you'd haul it out with wagons and teams to the elevator or granaries.
Mm-hmm. How was the thresher operated? By what? Was it steam power?
Yes, the old steam engine. Most of them were steam engines come around there. I still now plow up occasionally a chunk of coal out where the old engine used to sit when they thrashed it, you know, and they'd drop off coal there. Dad always had to go get a load of coal before the thrashing machine got there. They had to furnish the coal while it was on their place. And now every once in a while I can see remains of the old thrashing machine engine there. And it run real slow when they're moving from one stack set to another. While you could just walk along real slow and keep up with it. Of course, it was all steel wheels. And
how does it? Is it self-propelled or what? How's it?
well, yes, the engine was self-propelled. It run itself. Then it had to turn around and back up and hook on the separator and get the feeder and hook the on it. And it was a slow process in moving from one field to another, or one set of stacks to another.
Okay. When did you start school?
I went to school at Tangier, all 12 years of high school.
Was it how big was the school?
Well, my graduating class was the biggest graduating class there was. It was 13 in it, so it was just a consolidated school. A lot of the little country schools went together and made a high school there.
So was there, how many teachers were in the school?
Well, they had two grades in each room, and then there was usually about 3 high school teachers.
Okay. Were any of your grandfathers in the Civil War?
No, I don't believe so.
Yeah.
Not that I know of.
Okay. After you went through high school, what'd you do?
Well, that was 1932, and there wasn't much to do back in 1932, if you remember the drought and the depression and everything else. But I went to Oklahoma A&M, at that time. I had a brother down there, so he'd been there 4 years. He was a senior the year I graduated. And, well, the first year out, wasn't able to go. I didn't have the money to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked around and sold a horse for $40 and took out a mid-semester. My dad took me out east of town here, and I had an old pasteboard suitcase with a Aggie sticker on it and a pasteboard box with a string around it, and I hitchhiked down Stillwater and start school.
What'd you study?
I took agriculture.
That was 1932?
Well, I think it was 1934 when I went a semester and then was out a semester and finally got financed together again to go. Well, I stayed with my sister and brother-in-law. They lived there then, and when I started back, I stayed with them, which I wouldn't have been able to go if I hadn't stayed with them.
Right.
And I graduated in 1938.
Who gave the commencement speech at your graduation?
I can't remember.
And you stayed with your sister the whole time you were there?
No, just about 1 year is all I stayed with her. Then they moved, and then I stayed out in town. I never did stay in a dormitory or anything like that.
So you just boarded out then?
Yeah, well, usually what you call light housekeeping. We didn't rent an apartment or something. It'd be 3 or 4 of us get together and do our own cooking. And one guy had put on the beans for. He went to 11 o'clock class, and the guy come back from 12 o'clock class. It's supposed to be done, ready for dinner.
Who was head of the agriculture department?
Well, Dr. Blizzard was head of the AH department at that time. And Dr. Wilhelm, I worked under Dr. Wilhelm. He was later president of the college, and I fed hogs experimental feeding out. I had to weigh the feed in and weigh it out, and weighed the hogs every Saturday and fed them different rations and different grains. And I remember Dr. Wilhelm used to come out there every Saturday and help us weigh hogs. He could, just one of us all that, he could remember names very easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I went to school there, he was still president.
Was he?
In '64.
Yes.
He was still there.
He was a wonderful man.
Mm-hmm. In '38, what'd you do after you graduated?
Well, after I graduated, the only jobs available at that time were government jobs with the Soil Conservation Service, Farm Home Administration or something. And after I was out, I came home and worked that summer. And then I went back to the ASC also at the state office. I worked as an auditor for about 2 weeks. Then I got a job as the assistant county supervisor at Sayre with the Farm Home Administration. Mm-hmm. And I worked there about 3 months, and in the meantime, I'd taken enough agronomy to qualify to take the civil service examination. So then I got an appointment with the Soil Conservation Service down in South Texas, Schulenburg. So I went with them, and I was with the Soil Conservation Service for over 10 years then.
Do any work for WPA?
No, when that year I was out a time or two, I drove a truck. We had an old Dodge truck, and my brother driven on the school bus route. Mm-hmm. And there was Cleaching Oklahoma Avenue down here, and I had a dump bed on that and hauled Cleaching down on that one winter.
That was WPA?
Yeah, I think that was a WPA project.
Mm-hmm. What were the dust forms like?
Well, they were pretty rough. You just, there wasn't nothing you could do but just stand there and take them and hope it would be over with. But I wasn't here when I was at Stillwater when they had that worst one in 1935. Yeah. But my brother, he had graduated, he was home then, and they said in the kitchen they'd stand and you couldn't see who anyone was across the room, and the kitchen dust was so bad. And whenever they eat, they just left the pots and pans on the stove, and they just take the lid off and dip out what they wanted and put the lid back on to keep food from getting full of dirt. And our old house, now we remodeled it, here 3 or 4 years ago, it was longer than that now. Mm-hmm. but it's just full of dirt from those storms of the 30s. Under the old shingles and siding and stuff like that, it just drifted in and pretty well insulated with dust.
Did you serve in World War II?
No, I never did. I was with the Soil Conservation Service during that time.
Mm-hmm. And you said that you were in Canadian Texas?
Yes, spent the last 6 years there with the Soil Conservation Service.
What'd you do with the Soil Conservation Service? What'd you do with them?
Well, we ran terrace lines, supervised building of dams and state dams. The first job I had, I went down to Schulenburg, and I reported down there to, it was back in the old CCC camp days. And I had about 180 Negro World War I veterans at that camp. And our duties there was to go out and contact the farmers, write up a conservation plan with the farmer, and then get some amount of work for these Negroes to do to keep them busy. That was the main purpose, for them to have something to do.
Mm-hmm.
They built fences, cleared land, sod gullies.
Okay, and when did you come back to Oklahoma?
Well, my dad retired from the farm in 1949, and that's when he retired and moved to town. He was 72 years old then, and an old country boy, I had to get back, so I took the farm over after they moved to town.
Mm-hmm. How big is the farm?
He had a section, 640 acres. It wasn't all in one place. It was in 3 different sections. But
Okay. Well, I think what else we can talk about? How has farming methods changed since you started?
oh, I told someone the other day that hydraulics was the best thing that ever happened to the farmer. I remember getting off and swinging on old plow handles, trying to get them in or out of the ground, and lifting things up, and anymore you just push a lever and it works pretty good, you know. That, I think that's helped the farmer more than anything. In 1957, we moved the farm in 1949, and we had 3 children at the time when I quit the SCS. In 1957, they had a drought then in the 50s, you know, that almost as bad or worse than the 30s. In 1957, Eisenhower made this drought tour up through there, and he stopped at our place that day that he came around there. That was quite an experience.
Oh, did you meet him?
Oh yes, yeah, he stopped, visited there at the place. Bill Taggart was county agent here at the time, and then they called me one day, wanted to know what I was doing. He wanted to bring somebody out to meet me, and so he came out. There's about 3 or 4 carloads of them, and they just spread all over the place. A Secret Service agent is what it was. And he finally said, "Carl, what we want to know is it'd be all right for President Eisenhower to stop here." So of course he couldn't very well say no. So that was about a week before he got there. And then the next week, why, we were under surveillance all the time, and Secret Service said, if you see anything unusual going out here, let us know about it, and don't tell anyone. We couldn't even tell our kids.
Yeah.
They were going to school. They said not to tell them until the night before, because they didn't want anybody to know that he was going to stop there.
Mm-hmm.
He said if they know it, they're going to tear your fences down, and you'll have problems, and we'll have more problems. And so no one knew until they made the tour, and then when they come around the tour, why they drove in, the whole tour stopped.
What did you talk to him about, President Eisenhower?
Well, that was one of my worries as to what I would talk to him about, but he was very easy to talk to. He was knowledgeable on agriculture and farming, and we just discussed the drought situation and problems we were having and all like that. He was very, very easy to talk to.
How many farms did he visit?
Just that one was the only
Just that one?
one on the tour.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, he hadn't used me in there for a day or two after that, and then for several years they would be calling him wanting interviews and stuff on his visit there. And we received letters from practically every state in the union. It went all over the whole United States.
It
was
is?
one of the highlights of his. Well, the newsmen, they all collected right this where they got their big stories and pictures and everything else.
Yeah, that's interesting.
In fact, we got some pictures out here in the museum of him while he was there at the place.
Good. Well, anything else you want to talk about?
Oh, there's a lot to be said. It's kind of like I said a while ago. There's so many things now I wish I could have asked my dad
Yeah.
before mother, before they were gone. That to me now is interesting as at the time we didn't think anything about it.
Right.
It was just common.
How big was the town of Tangier?
At one time it was almost as large as Woodward. They had, I think, 3 banks and 7 saloons and 2 churches and butcher shops, several grocery stores and merchandise stores, and I think 2 or 3 lumber yards.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the shipping point to Fort Supply before the Katy Railroad came through. They would put their supplies off there, and then by a wagon train they would take them up to Fort Supply.
When did they close Fort Supply?
You say, what?
When did they close Fort Supply? Any idea?
Well, no, I don't, not the exact date. When they closed it is when they made the mental hospital out of it. But that wasn't, I remember, I know my folks were living there when they brought the first patients in from Norman, and they brought them into Tangier on a train, and they hired a whole group of farmers around there with wagons to take the patients up to the Fort Supply Hospital.
How come they put that hospital here at Fort Supply? Any idea?
Well, the government owned the land there. It was government-owned land, and they had buildings there. There's still buildings there from the old fort. And they had nothing else to use it for at that time, and they were in need of a facility, I guess, so they just used what they had and started off.
Well, I think we have a good interview. When's the first time you came to Woodward?
You mean as a kid?
Yeah.
No, I don't. I can remember coming to town with Dad in the wagon when I guess it must have been before I was old enough to go to school. And we'd come down the wagon team for something, or maybe bring a load of maize or something in, and we out there back of Adam's grocery store. He'd tie the horses up to the wagon, and for dinner we'd go buy some cheese and crackers, and, and then we'd start back home and get home by night. It was a full day's trip in.
Well, I guess that's it. Anything else?
Well, nothing I can think of right now.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be of any assistance again.